to be your host for today. Okay, this meeting's being recorded. Very good. I'm Ray Molony. I'm the head of content at the Build Back Better Awards, and I'm going to be your host for today. Today, we're discussing how manufacturers and others can achieve carbon neutrality. Specifically, our panel is going to share their learnings from their own journeys on the way to net zero. Our panel today includes Maurice Loosschilder, who is the head of sustainability, strategy and reporting at Signify. And his team have been driving the net zero program, and they have achieved carbon neutrality status for Signify back in September, which I think I'm right in saying is an industry first, certainly for a lighting company of any scale. We're also joined by Dave Hollingsbee, who is the managing director of Stoane Lighting. And I think it's fair to say that Stoane Lighting are something of a pioneer in the industry in terms of restructuring how they work along circular economy principles. And they've set up this Renew program for refurbishing and repairing luminaires. They're also one of the founding members of the new Greenlight Alliance initiative. We've got Nigel Harvey, who is the chief executive of Recolight. Now, anyone who knows Nigel knows that he is a passionate environmentalist. And at Recolight, he is overseeing the recycling of an incredible a third of 1 billion lamps since the start. He's a former Lux Person of the Year, and he's chair of the UK's WE Producer Compliance Scheme Trade Association. And finally, we have Bill Skeates. Now, Bill is the Senior Sustainability and Compliance Manager for Sky. He's a very influential figure in the world of the circular economy and resource efficiency. He's the industry expert for Senelec on non-energy requirements for the eco-design regulations. And he's assisted the United Nations on raw materials and corporate and social responsibility. And what I think what's really key with Bill is he's going to give us a non-lighting industry perspective, which I think will be very welcome. On to housekeeping. You all know the drill. You will get the slides. You'll get a link to the slides will be emailed to you all later today. This session is being recorded and it will eventually be posted onto the Recolight events page. You can go back and look at it again. We'll finish around between 12 and 12:30, depending on questions, etc. And what else can I tell you? Yes, please put your questions and comments in the Q&A box. Please reserve the chat box for any technical questions, any administration questions, and Suzanne will do her best to answer any queries that you have. Now, as I said, you can go back and see our the webinars we've already done this year: the return of the lamp, the circular economy legislation for lighting, which is a lot about the eco-design regulations and the environment bill. And if you go to the recolight.co.uk events, follow the links, you can go and see those videos. You can fast forward them and choose whichever section you want, which is good. And just to put on your radar, the two that we're looking forward to in the autumn, we have the specifiers role in the circular economy. That's on Thursday, the 16th of September. And then we have designing for end of life, and that's designing luminaires and lighting installations and how we handle the end of life, what happens to them. That's on Thursday, the 28th of October. So 2 dates for your diary there. Now, I usually start these webinars with news of sustainable and circular lighting from around the industry. Today is no exception. I think the first standout bit of news this month is the development by the Society of Lighting of this, which is TM66, the Technical Memorandum 66, which is basically come up with some metrics for measuring the circularity of a lighting product. And that's something that people have been asking about and wanting for, so that we can actually say this is has better circular economy principles and credentials than this product. Now, these circular economy assessment methods are pretty complex, but what they've managed to do is to come up with a single number between 1 and 4 for rating a luminaire and how sustainable it really is. So if you think about like the NCAP for crash testing on cars, it's a very complex process, but it comes up with a very simple number. I think it's 1 in 5 with a car as to how safe it is. Now, clearly the SLL hopes that this method will get a strong uptake from manufacturers and specifiers so that we can drive sustainability throughout the market. And I think we should give a name check here to Bob Bohannon and Christina Allison, who have been instrumental in developing the document and the metrics. And certainly to be applauded, the simplicity of it, which I particularly buy into, because I think we tend to make things quite complex for ourselves in the lighting industry. The next development is the establishment, which I mentioned earlier, of the Green Light Alliance. This is an organization with a mission to move towards circular economy in lighting design. It aims to educate the lighting community as well as the wider built environment about how lighting can become a leading example of circular design. And you can see more about it on its website, or it's got a profile page on LinkedIn. And finally, we're starting to see some new business models in this space. And one of these, example of these is ARA or ARA, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. And their mission is to supply modular building technologies, including lighting, as a service. And it's run by a former Osram executive called Fabian Reingruber, who bills himself as a circular entrepreneur, and that's a new job title for me. I haven't seen that before. And the way this works is the company leases luminaires, but it doesn't make anything itself. Instead, it buys modular parts to its specification from other suppliers, and basically puts them together. And at the end of life, it takes back the luminaires, upgrades them, it re-rents them, and organizes any recycling that would take place. And Ryan Gruber says that customers can realize a 30% reduction in lighting costs while keeping up to date with technology, as they have the flexibility to basically upgrade elements or pieces of it at any time. So that's our roundup for today. Let's turn to the topic at hand, and our first speaker, Bill Skeates, who is going to walk us through the current supply chain and outline what it needs to look like if we're going to get to net zero by 2030. Bill.
Thank you very much, Ray. And if we can have the first slide. So just to give you a little bit of background to my role and Sky's involvement in this area. Sky's made a commitment of net zero by 2030. I cover the product side of Sky. So this is set-top boxes, routers, cables, dishes, everything related to being able to view our product. And we place about 3.5 million products on the market each year. Sky totally has 11,000 suppliers, and for what we deal with here, we probably have 300 to 400 critical suppliers. And the net zero campaign falls within one aspect of a three-pronged approach we have to sustainability, which looks at climate change, human rights and resources, resource efficiency, circular economy. For the climate change, key things that we're looking at, and I'll go into more detail, is electric vehicles for our fleet, a renewable energy program with our suppliers, a green grid energy program, supplier and energy management systems, and onshoring of assembly and parts, plus potential biofuels for freight. And I'll come back to those in a bit more detail as the slides, as we work through the slides. Human rights, we have a strong human rights program. We audit, I think we're up to visiting and auditing 80 suppliers a year ourselves, where we are on site. We also, again, along with the lighting industry, conflict minerals is a big part of that side of the work. We have now engaged with our main suppliers on supplier worker surveys. A lot of our suppliers are in Asia and have very different working conditions to Europe, and so we work to improve those. And we're also trying to work with slavery victim work placements. For resource efficiency, I think I may have discussed some of these before with Recolight, but we have an eco-design program. We're looking at automated disassembly, upscaling of end-of-life products, a reuse of plastics, and we are single-use plastic-free in our operations now, and in our logistics. And we've also pushed that onto our tier 1 suppliers. So if we go to looking specifically at sustainability, we've based our strategy very much around where we have control for my area in the product manufacture and its distribution, its repair and recycling. Sky, other parts of Sky have looked at engaging with the use for the customer and other things like our buildings, our broadcasting, etc. Just as a little recap on what the rest of Sky is doing before I go into details, one of the things that we are looking at is for each of our customers, supporting them in their energy bills to give an option to move over to green energy. So that's not well under my personal remit, and I won't be going into too much details on that, but it does help with the in-use CO2 emissions for our net zero campaign. So for the area that I cover, this is the production of the electronics. We also have a mobile division, so it is the energy from the production of our suppliers producing mobile phones. We have a logistics, warehouse and repair, software services, and fleet, and then there is a small amount of other aspects. And I imagine for the lighting industry, it must be, well, other than the mobile side of it, it must be quite similar, as lighting is mainly electronics, and you will have all of those aspects in your supply chain. We have got sort of four background focuses, which is creating transparency in what we do, so building that into our supply chain to push for data, so things are clear on what we need to achieve. We've obviously got a scope 1 to 3 reporting progress, and our first year was gaining our baseline data, so then we could set up our objectives and targets. We are working to optimize CO2, looking at sustainability standards, benchmarking best practice, and then sharing that best practice across our supply chain. And then looking at our sourcing strategy, looking at materials, etc., what can most influence our product and reducing its CO2. We do through things like LCAs, etc. Engaging with suppliers, so we have integrated emissions metrics, which we pushed and request from our suppliers, and it's now written in all our contracts that energy metric data, CO2 metric data is required. And we've also got a program to engage with our suppliers to address their emissions. And I'll come on to some of those things in a minute. Engaging with peers. So sometimes we're a small player in some of the electronics side of things. And so we rely on international certification, advocacy, best practices, but we're also looking at, with trade associations and with the Responsible Business Alliance, looking at potential buying groups to amplify our demand side commitments, so that you may have a big supplier, but if you have all of their customers saying the same thing, you've got a bit more of an influence over what's going on. And finally, one of the, I think the biggest steps is to align carbon governance to the incentives of our employees. So CO2 reduction is part of is one of the objectives of everyone's annual objectives, which we base employee assessments each year, and potentially bonuses. So if we move on to our next slide. So is it possible? This was a very interesting slide from the World Economic Forum that highlights that these things are possible, and there are little steps against each of these. So refurbishment, recycling has an impact, and it is already quite a mature market. Obviously, Sky's model is a service model, so we own all of our equipment. So every time we get it back, we repair it, service it, or in fact, we now have the option to repair in situ with software and guidance on the internet over the phone. We are reducing the amount of products being placed on the market and then reducing our CO2 footprint. We're using LCA tools, simple LCA tools that you can get off the internet, which gives you a spreadsheet, and you can put in different materials and it can give you the CO2 through to, so that's a simple tool that our designers use, through to more complicated tools such as SEMA Pro and Garby, where we, for existing products, we put the whole of those bill of materials in there. And then when we make changes, we can see improvements to reduce CO2 and their impacts. Obviously, smaller, lighter makes a big difference, but material change also makes a difference. Then engaging with our suppliers to support them with changing their energy to green energy, such as a big program. Our 4 main factories now all have solar panels. In China, where we have different requirements in Europe, we find a lot of our suppliers have the opportunity for green electricity, and certain parts of the world are a bit more windy than others, and those are options as well. More difficult is, and we were having a little chat before we came online, is dealing with countries where you have a colder climate. So typically in Asia, we don't have a heating requirement, but in Europe we do. And so then it's replacement of gas with things like ground source heat pumps, biomass heat, etc. And what we are doing in those areas is we are supporting our suppliers with incentives for them to adopt those, or CapEx and return through reduced cost of parts, where we've helped support them put up renewable options. Hydrogen, we've not yet got involved in this, but hydrogen power for some of the more heavy industry aspects, such as production of metals, significantly smaller than coal power. And in any way we can support our manufacturing base with that, we do. Then there's the bio-based plastics, which we have not necessarily looked at, but we have got rid of all plastics from our packaging. So wood-based packaging for everything, which again has a reduction on CO2, because obviously the production of wood absorbs CO2 before it's released in making it into cardboard, etc. Then we will be moving our fleet, and have started to move our fleet completely over to hydrogen. And finally, we're also looking at carbon capture and storage technology for plastic production. So next slide. And we have a timeline. So we have key things that we are trying to put in place. So this is just sort of the practical steps we're taking. We have set out to 2018 as our baseline. So everything we work from is 2018. From that last year, we've engaged with each of our suppliers, and also baseline. We've got 2 aspects, because sometimes it's quite difficult. It was quite difficult to get the data. We've gone for where we don't have the data, worked on an expense basis, and then we replace that with data as we engage with the suppliers. So some of the CO2 is based on spend against industry type. We try, and we're working towards replacing those with actual data. And so that a lot of 2020 was engaging with tier 1 suppliers to do that. We've set up our energy reduction program, which involved across the supply chain part of the business, setting up champions and teams to support those champions. And obviously people wanted to get involved with that because it affected their objectives for the year and will do for the next 10 years. Supplier engagement and reduction options. So we engaged with our suppliers to see what they were doing. We asked the questions before we told them what they needed to do, because they may have a lot better idea than us. 2021, we've started energy audits of our key suppliers. We have looked at cost analysis, because sometimes to do reductions at our factories, it might be a medium or long-term payback. And so we've tried to understand that, especially with some of our suppliers, which are open book, where we can then support that. And then we have pushed a target on our suppliers for 10% reduction in scope 1 and 2 of their own areas. And although we've got milestones against each of these points, a lot of these things have already started. This is where we hope to see where the milestone is, that they are being rolled out effectively across each of the areas. So we've developed an energy toolkit for our own new designs, so that we learn from what we're doing. We are looking at a supplier best practice certification, so we can reward them. We've already started trialing rail from Asia to Europe. There is now rail connections from our factories, which I think has been a relatively new thing, but is a lot more efficient than air freight. Again, emissions metrics standard in supply contracts. We've already started that. Performance tracking against suppliers' objectives, and carbon linked to team objectives. So that's another step where we have finance, and then we're also pushing on a carbon, because we are working on being net zero. We will have to potentially pay either for investment in our factories to reduce CO2, or we will be paying to capture carbon. And so those carbon costs will become a reality. CapEx, as I said before, to support supplier renewables, scaling up buying groups to amplify our demand for suppliers that aren't engaged, just being a bit conscious of the time. Putting pressure on upstream metal materials to move away from coal by 2025, and meet a 50% reduction of scope 1 and 2 from our existing suppliers. And then the next 5 years, getting our suppliers to commit to net zero goals, looking at hydrogen for road freight, requiring green tariffs for European suppliers as a must. Green fleets and no hybrids or diesels by 2027, renewable heat options for European suppliers, recycled parts, we'd like to increase those in our products to 50% for all parts over 25 grams, onshoring of purchasing policy, so where we can source more locally, reduce the logistics, and then pilot project for carbon capture, alternative fuel shipping, so already some of our suppliers are providing an option for biofuel for shipping, and working how we can reduce our air freight. And then we look to achieve historic emissions reductions by 500,000 tonnes. And we'll also be looking at, as our business grows, reduction in emissions by 1 million tonnes, making hopefully 1.5 billion tonnes of carbon reduction. Next slide, and last slide, I think. And just, no, sorry, yes, this one, just 2 more minutes. So this is an example from this year for our suppliers. We've given them a goal. If they introduce ISO 50001, or have renewables, or have green electricity, or have come up with new innovative technologies, all of those count to 10%, 50% reduction in their energy use. We monitor from a product point of view, weight, size, type, distance change, to see if it's affecting our suppliers and our CO2. And then we have tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, where we are engaging on actual footprints on a quarterly basis. So we have these scorecards, if you like, for each of our suppliers. So thank you for that. I think I may have just gone over a tiny bit, but I want to hand over to Maurice. And yes, thank you.
All right, thanks, Bill. Good morning, everybody. My name is Maurice Loosschilder, and I'm currently the head of sustainability for Signify. And those of you who do not know Signify, Signify used to be Philips Lighting. And in 2016, we spun off from Royal Philips, and we are in pretty much all the areas of the lighting industry. Yeah? We sell light sources, luminaires, as well as systems and services. And we are still the #1 in connected LED and conventional lighting. Looking at revenue, 6.5 billion last year, approximately 75% is B2B business, and we employ 37,000 people across the globe in 74 countries. And of course, we're here today because, we are a 100% carbon neutral company in our operations. But let's zoom in a little bit more on how did we get there. And we have launched our first sustainability program as an independent company, independent from Royal Philips, back in 2015. And we called it Brighter Lives, Better World, which was a program that had a number of commitments that we needed to reach by the end of 2020. And here you see a few of the achievements. Of course, we are carbon neutral and we reached 100% renewable electricity, but we actually did more than these two. We also had zero waste to landfill, for example, by the end of last year. 84% of everything that we sold came from a sustainable product, system, or service. And in total, between 2015 and 2020, we delivered 2.9 billion LED products to the market. If you look at our supply chain, then 99% performance rate with our suppliers, and health and safety is also part of our sustainability program. Brighter Lives, which is the social side of our program, as well as Better World, the environmental angle. And then in the bottom, you see a few of the external recognition that we received in the past few years. CDP Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We have been in the top 3 for 4 years in a row now. #1 in the electronics industry in Sustainalytics, and a nice one to emphasize is the Global Climate Action Award, which we actually won last year, December, where the UN awarded us for our carbon neutral commitment. And we are one of the 3 companies globally that achieved this award. So very proud of that. So let's zoom in a bit more into carbon neutral. So we actually are a carbon neutral company, and at COP21, back in 2015, we set ourselves the goal, and we launched it externally, to become carbon neutral by the end of 2020. And the scope for us is, we look at manufacturing, so that's our own manufacturing facilities, non-industrial locations, so that is offices, warehouses, workshops, as well as logistics that we pay for, and business travel. So those are the 4 scopes that we do include in our carbon neutral commitment. And as you can see, in the past 5 years, since the start of the program, we have reduced quite massively in all these individual categories. And the biggest shift in offices, for example, was due to the fact that we also moved to 100% renewable electricity. And we did that through a few power purchase agreements, mostly virtual power purchase agreements that we have in the US as well as in Poland. And we also launched a new one in Finland for the rest of our European operations. And we were also the first multinational company to invest in renewable electricity in the Gulf region near Dubai. And if you look at our carbon footprint of the past decade, and that's also why my presentation is called A Decade of Climate Action, we actually started reducing our carbon footprint back in 2010. And you see that in the past 10 years, we have reduced with more than 70%, and our 2020 carbon footprint was 260 kilotons of carbon. Of course, we also did some offsetting, because you see 260, so we are not a carbon-free company, we are a carbon neutral company, and we did know that we had unavoidable emissions. And with that, we also use offsetting projects. And the 70% reduction equals to taking 500,000 cars off the road for 1 year. Okay, so how did we actually do it? That is, of course, the question for a company our size. And I captured that in pretty much 5 lessons learned. So let's move to the first lesson, which is for me integration. And the first step for me is we need to have ownership from the top. Without the buy-in of your C-suite, this is going to be very difficult. And we have been very lucky with our CEO, who basically is sharing our passion for sustainability. So he personally has been driving the carbon neutral commitment, as well as our drive to circular economy, for example, and plastic-free packaging. Another crucial step for us has been that we need to build it into our company strategy. So for years, we've had a sustainability strategy and a company strategy. And since last year, we actually combined the two. So now we don't have a sustainability strategy anymore. We have a sustainable company strategy. And these levers, like climate action, like circular economy, have been really taking part of the company strategy. Third step is that you also have to involve the entire company, and not just the sustainability team or procurement, because everybody's choices is impacting the carbon footprint of the company. Every decision that you make in the company has an impact. Therefore, you have to involve the entire company. Fourth point, you have to set targets for yourself, not just towards the end, but really from the start, put yourself a goal. Just commit yourself to some targets and make sure that you get close to these targets. If you don't make it exactly, that's not really a problem. Just make sure that you go into the right direction. And one way to do it is to communicate relentlessly. You have to involve everybody in your company through internal communication, but also externally involve the right stakeholders through external communication. So first step, integration. Second step, understand and reduce your energy use. So what we did, we basically looked at, back at the start of our commitment, we looked at where are actually our biggest contributors to the carbon footprint. For example, logistics and manufacturing were huge for a manufacturing company our size. So it is very important first to understand where you have your biggest impact, and then also try to set out a roadmap, as Bill just showed, try to put a roadmap out of what you're going to improve at what point in time. For us, sounds like a no-brainer with a lot of lighting audience in this call, switching to LED lighting and efficient HVAC. So for us, it made a huge difference also to apply our own products in our own manufacturing facilities. Then also look at your logistics. So we made a pact with Maersk Line, one of the biggest shippers for us. And we optimized routing, for example. We optimized loading degrees. We worked with them to make sure that they also reduce the carbon footprint of their vessels. So that was really creating a win-win. Fourth point, eliminating unnecessary business travel. I think that the COVID pandemic has really showed that we can really do with less business travel. And for us, business travel is not just flying, it's also lease cars and rental cars, for example. And that is the fifth bullet. As Bill also showed, we have had a commitment out there to be fully electrical in 2030 for our own lease fleet. So we currently have a policy in place that is dictating everybody to go for EV, unless you have a good reason for an exception. And so far, I haven't seen a good reason yet. Okay, so that was step 2. Step 3, embrace renewables. As I said, we shifted to 100% renewable electricity through these power purchase agreements in the US and in Poland. And now with a consortium with Heineken and Royal Philips, for example, we enter into a pan-European virtual power purchase agreement by the start of 2023. For the parts in the world that is not possible, invest in green tariffs and renewable electricity certificates. And we really use the phased approach, as you can see in the slide. From the moment that we started, we looked at the renewable electricity percentages, and then we gradually built that up towards 2020. So step 3, renewables. Step 4, next step is, the final step in the process is offsetting. But you do need to find offsetting with a purpose that fits with your company purpose, with your company strategy. For us, we chose a partner, and this partner really is managing the whole portfolio of offsetting, and they do the due diligence and making sure that we select the right projects. And these are aligned with our company strategy as well as with our CSR objectives. And we also use it, for example, for employee engagement. So we ask our own employees to vote for the carbon offsetting project they feel the most connection with, and then we invest in these projects. Very important, we only go for certified projects to make sure that we do the right thing. Then final step is collaboration. And collaboration is really trying to find organizations, and we see that in the next slide, try to find the organizations that are like-minded. So we joined, for example, the Climate Pledge from Amazon, and we work closely together with Climate Group and WEF and CDP and the World Green Building Council, really to make a difference all together, because all together we can make so much more impact than we can do on our own. And it's also very important that you commit also to these target-based initiatives like EV100, science-based targets, RE100, because they really keep you sharp and keep you on track to become carbon neutral. Okay, so now we have ticked the box of carbon neutrality. So what's next? So last year in September, we announced carbon neutrality and we ended our Brighter Lives, Better World program. So at that point in time, we also launched our new 5-year program. And what you see on the left of the screen is the Signify 5 Frontier strategy. And as I said, we don't have a sustainability strategy anymore. We have growth for sustainability really embedded as the 3rd frontier in our strategy. And the 5 growth for sustainability areas, which are the areas that will make Signify grow as a company, are climate action, circular economy, food availability, safety, security, and health and well-being. And we have divided it up, connected them to the Sustainable Development Goals, and then divided it up into our environmental impact, better world, as well as our social impact in these 3 growth areas, as well as great place to work for ourselves, as well as for our suppliers, for example, which is then Brighter Lives. So this is how we connected it to the company strategy. And then next you can really see how that materialized into commitments. And the overarching theme of the Brighter Lives, Better World 2025 program is doubling our impact, both on the environment as well as on society. So next we can see the 4 big main doubling commitments that are connected to the growth areas. So for climate action, we want to double the pace we achieved the Paris Agreement, 1.5 degree scenario. And for circular economy and for Brighter Lives, we want to double the amount of revenues coming from these individual growth areas. Last but not least, we also have a diversity and inclusion commitment to double the amount of women in leadership roles to 34%. So those are the 4 big commitments. And next to that, we also have our programs that we will continue and strengthen. For example, the carbon neutral and zero waste to landfill program. But of course, here we talk about carbon. So what is then the next step in carbon? So let's zoom in a little bit more on the double the pace of the Paris Agreement. And as you can see, this is our commitment to the Paris Agreement. And the difference between carbon neutrality that we did before and in this commitment is pretty much that we now are including product use phase as well as our supply chain, so our suppliers. And as you can see, that is roughly 1,000 times bigger than our own carbon footprint. You see now 400 megatons, where previously it was 260 kilotons. And the black line that you see there is the 1.5 degree pathway for a baseline year 2019. And we are reducing, the Paris Agreement is reducing 4.2% every single year. And the white line is what we project is our own projection for our carbon footprint, including product use and supply chain. So we expect that we will reach the Paris level of 2031 already in 2025. So where the black line will take us 12 years in time, we will do it in 6 years in time. And that with that, we claim to be doubling the pace of the Paris Agreement. And we mainly do that through energy efficiency of our own portfolio and working with our suppliers to also reduce the carbon footprint in the supply chain. Okay, that brings me to the key takeaways of my presentation. So first of all, for us, it is really at the heart of our purpose and strategy as a company. And we combine technology and innovation to drive growth for sustainability. And then the 5 lessons learned that we always try to bring across are integration, reducing and understanding your own energy use, embrace renewables, offset with the purpose, and of course, collaboration as the final lever. So with that, I would like to thank you all for listening to my story, and I would like to hand it over to Dave.
Thank you, Maurice. Hi, everybody. Wow, that's I hadn't seen that before. It's quite inspiring. Hopefully it's not too much of a duplication here. I mean, it's a completely different order of magnitude. So maybe there's something interesting to draw by comparing the macro and the micro. But I'll go on from here. So really, we were asked to give a short presentation on how we're tackling the challenges of going net zero. So what follows is our version of a not dissimilar, but other than in scale of what Maurice has just been sharing with you. So yeah, at the end, if there's time, I've also been asked to have a quick chat about the B Corp side of things that we've embarked onto. So just to, from a high level point of view, you're probably all aware of the United Nations Climate Change Race to Zero initiative. There's all sorts of sub-initiatives that come underneath that, recognised or otherwise. Just for example, there's a couple there. And being a new B Corp, we zeroed in on that one as the one we were going to sort of just put our name behind. We've always felt that we do things in a reasonable manner, but we had some good practices in place, but we needed to give it some more focus to do it justice, perhaps. And one of the first things we decided was to make a pledge, and hence going for this net zero 2030 as sort of promoted by the B Corp collective. Once you've done that, it focuses the minds internally, and it's enabled us to get a bit more buy-in from the staff as well. The next thing we really learned about was counting. I thought we were quite good at keeping track of what we spend and what we use, but once you start doing carbon counting and that kind of thing, you really realize just how much of quantification is involved. And it quickly illustrates to you where your strengths and weaknesses are. Yes, there's some surprises, but generally you know, but it just helps you to quantify it. And early on in that, we saw the benefit, the necessity of moving towards ever more circular practices. Adopting the circular economy was vital to a manufacturing company. And from there, another intuitive thing is to go looking for leaks. Sort of where are the big gaps in what we're doing? For example, energy is an easy one. It's not one that's really in our control. We unlike Maurice, don't have the clout to be negotiating sort of on a continental scale, you know, our energy providers. But the next slide will show, you know, we started, we're still looking at how we move across to better sources of energy and removing ourselves from contracts which we'd rather not be involved with, and then taking the initiative of you know, renewable sources, photovoltaics, that kind of thing around our premises to make a meaningful dent in our energy use. And then similarly, those of our supply chain. But you quite early on realize that you're not going to you know, remove your carbon completely, and that in the short and medium term, at least, there's going to be the need to offset some carbon. There, I completely echo comments that Maurice was just making. You hear some dubious stories out there of people who maybe not made the best choices initially, but there's no need to do that. There's outfits out there, companies out there that will ratify and certify best practice, best funds, best projects. So a couple of them are up there on the slide. So being, I guess, vigilant about where you go to do your carbon offsetting and think about that. Maybe come back to that again in a minute. And really, then it's going back to the beginning again. Once you've quantified it, you've offset it. Well, yeah, you then realise just what there is to tackle, and it's a continual loop going around. I think the carbon offsetting tool, which will be there for a good while for us, is going to act, if nothing else, or as well as the obvious, it will force us to review regularly and highlight the need to you know, focus in on certain areas repeatedly. Other things like, you know, the B Corp, business impact assessments, these sorts of things ensure that you continually go back and review and improve. So I'd like to just go back in just a little bit more depth over a couple of these points, probably in reverse order. So back to the carbon offset. Actually, Maurice has covered this as well, so probably not much need for this slide. But it's not just simply offsetting a number. It's important that you realise that where that money gets spent has an impact. So considering sort of broader impacts as well, not just bunging in some trees in a field in a relatively affluent country like the UK or England or wherever, but that your impacts might be further afield. So consider doing it there, or places where the impact might be better, or broader into sort of societal factors as well, and worry, ensuring that you're not going into monocropping and just that it's a suitably considered fund. Next slide, I think, shows that we used a company called Earthly, who we thought were very good, and take a lot of the sort of concern and worry of that out and present you with a well-considered set of options, science-backed, verified, and with a margin of error too, to make sure you're probably carbon positive. Probably enough on there. I think I just covered some of this. This was our first encounter with carbon counting and our first results, and immediately you can see some areas to zoom in, and I suspect in the next couple of years those scopes will rise and fall as we get better at counting and mitigating the scores in certain areas, and also the content that's put in there. In some areas we actually counted items which we probably by rights wouldn't need to, but 2020, the year we just counted, wasn't a very typical year. Probably it was artificially low in terms of carbon use, so we included a bunch of things which arguably wouldn't be in there, which probably skews things a bit, but sets us up so it's not going to be too much of a shock in a more normal year. And here was just an example of just some of the bits that we're putting our offsets into. Come back to that if anybody's interested in the specifics later on. Move on, please. Yeah, so then moving on, sort of zooming out a little bit, and what it looks and feels like as a small business trying to sort of pick our way through this. I think activism, collaboration is vital. We're not going to sort this alone. Every ship's rising on the same tide, really. We can all see, I think, that a common metric would be a really good way in terms of the circular economy being adopted within our industry. That's something we're particularly keen on. It was mentioned at the beginning that there's hopefully an imminent release of TM66. There's other great initiatives out there already, Lighting for Good and the like. Standards are coming through and being reviewed all the time. There's a lot of activity out there, and for a small business it's quite daunting keeping track of all of that. But we want to play our part in it. We want to be on the leading edge of that, doing what we can and adopting what we think makes sense as quick as we can. And from that front, initiatives like the Green Alliance have been really welcomed, it would seem, and is a great way of gathering like minds, sharing information quickly, and I think we're only just seeing the beginnings of what that will do. And in the background, there's all sorts of other organisations there you can tap into. Just in the corner of the slide, got there the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the B Corps and the B Lab outfit, which have all sorts of initiatives specifically towards the environmental and sustainable side of things. So there's heaps of stuff out there. Picking your way through it can be a bit daunting, but those that are reticent or not knowing where to start, that don't be afraid of that. And for example, not wanting to plug Green Alliance overly, but yeah, it's a good place to start. Then moving on, specifically, we're a manufacturer of luminaires after all, and I think a very key part of us reaching reaching net zero is the design and the production of the light fittings themselves. Obviously, we put a lot of effort into honing the what goes into the this ZTA range, for example. You can find out more about that if you want to see a paper on it on our website. And actually, there's a CPD we're hoping to roll out very soon on the big picture around that too. So yeah, I suppose what this slide's there to do is just to make the point that a big part of our carbon is the product, how we produce it, what goes on during its life, how we extend that life, whether that's through people being able to maintain it or us intervening to maintain it or even renew it, which I can come back to that if anybody's got any questions. So there's a lot of bits in there. But the next point about renew, this comes back to my point about leaks, I suppose. It's all very well being proud of the fact your products last and that they're upgradable and components can be replaced. But if that's not easy to do, or a customer doesn't know how to go about doing that, well, it's not really much use until such time as there's a broader, perhaps similar to the auto industry, a service and maintenance network. It felt like it was a bit hollow, so we set about plugging that gap by firming up what's gone on for many years at Stoane Lighting in terms of willingness and ability to take back old fittings and upgrade them, make that a bit more visible, and also make that a bit more attractive, i.e. that we can do it local to the venue, certainly in the UK, and we're looking at ways of doing that in other areas. We sell kit as well to allow customers, for example, not to be without their luminaires for long periods of time if we can do a sort of rolling upgrade actually at their facility. So again, we've got more information on the Renew service if people want to dive into that. This last one, well, nearly the last one on this topic is really just showing a sort of glimpse of the roadmap as we see it. There's many steps along this journey, obviously, and we're still at the beginning of it from our point of view. But you can see the key points, similar to some that Maurice was talking about. Timelines, in some ways, the offset was easier and more affordable than we feared it might be, so that's come forward quicker. The travel, that side of things, is really hard to get a gauge on. We know that there's plenty that can be done there. Again, echo Maurice's point about the sort of new way we operate since COVID in the last year, travel-wise, communications-wise. So we'll see how it goes there. Shipping, localization, distribution of our subcontractors. That's a really interesting one. Traditionally, it's all fairly close to hand, apart from the more technical stuff like LEDs and drivers. But as we sell stuff further afield, we're having some interesting conversations there about how we don't undo that good practice of being able to keep our suppliers close to hand. And then there's a couple of illustrations there at the bottom left. Leakage in terms of waste that is inevitable to a certain degree, making anything, but doing our best to reduce that by means of design, but also coming up with ways to processes and designs that can utilize any waste that does happen, or as much of it as possible. There's been some really good inroads into that in the last six to 12 months, some of which hopefully we'll be able to talk about very, very soon. And then into the next one, please. Yeah, so just kind of drawing this to a conclusion, this and then another one in a moment, it needn't be a counter-commercial thing. It's actually important that it isn't, otherwise it just won't happen. It needn't be something sort of hippie or make you a bit queasy about the designs. There's some being a necessity, being mother invention and all that. We're seeing already in-house interesting new ideas coming up. It shouldn't quash creativity. Hopefully it'll inspire it. And that the mission we've got before us all should go hand in hand with the margin that we need to make in order to pursue it further. It needs to. So for us, this last slide was really a simple summary of how it looks for us and what inspires us. I think nobody can know exactly how it's going to pan out. There's plenty we still need to do. Some of this is in play, some of it isn't yet. So from simply doing the obvious pragmatic stuff like energy supplies, supply sources, and doing what we can in-house there, moving away from fossil fuel vehicles, that sort of thing, in-house repairs and reuse, that kind of thing, recycling, all of that, fairly straightforward to implement. The designs of the products we put out into the market, supporting their continued use and extending that use on, out in field. And then working with the industry, as there'll be new metrics coming through that help quantify the good and the bad, ways to communicate what's necessary at the end of life or during upgrade and repair in the way of instructions and how they're hosted and served to customers, or recycling facilities, that sort of thing, and doing what we can to reduce the amount of virgin material needed to make lights and using our waste. So I think that was the last slide on that overall topic. And then if there is time, I don't know if the fact that the slides come up, I'm presuming there is, a couple of minutes just on what is a B Corp and why I was asked to put together. Well, B Corp is a benefit corporation. It's essentially a corporate social responsibility measure, and there are others out there as well, but it's a bit more besides, and they have different sort of emphasis, I suppose. There's a slide up there now which summarizes the main mission statement. So a B Corp is a business set up to meet high standards that are verified, not just environmentally but socially as well, that are transparent. It's a legally enshrined status. You have to change your articles of association as part of the deal, and it's just partly about initiating a shift in the culture of what's considered success in business, making a more inclusive society, the shift from shareholder to stakeholder primacy. The actual process involves a fairly rigorous questionnaire and submission of all sorts of information about your business, whereby you need to score at least 80 out of 200. I think it indicates the sort of the traditional average of about 50 or so. 80 is the pass mark. We in our first year passed 87.6. It goes right up to 200. It's broken down into all sorts of different sections, 5 key pillars. It's environment that's highlighted there, that being just one of them. But I think we all are aware these days that it's not just about the environment. These other factors are inextricably linked with that, societal factors as well. So, so every 3 years you need to resubmit the same business impact assessment, the BIA, and you need to pass again. Most people try and work their way up the scale, obviously. So, well, there it is really. It works as a sort of statement of intent internally as a team, to our suppliers as well, but also hopefully to customers. Particularly, we felt as a sort of, not just as a stopgap, but until more sort of universally agreed metrics are in place to quantify the behaviours and product of the business, this would serve as something at least to indicate the work that's going on behind the scenes, to do what we think is right in the best way. So that's it from me. Happy to take questions on either of those topics. I think I'm now handing back to Ray.
Thank you, Dave. I think that was a really valuable contrast. Thank you in terms of, a small to medium-sized enterprise, medium-sized lighting company compared to the big boy that is Signify. So that was really valuable. Thank you. Right, I've been reminded that I should really clarify that before you all beat a path to Balham to get your copy of TM66 from the Society of Light and Lighting, I should point out that it needs to go through the formal approval and review process. And so it's not technically available at the moment, but that's something to look forward to. Right, at this point, guys, if you could put on your cameras and your microphones, that'd be great. Nigel, I'm going to bring you in at this point. Now, you are not a manufacturer as such, but you're an organization and you are starting on your net zero journey. Do you want to tell us about that and what steps you're taking and all that?
Yes, first of all, I was humbled and inspired by what we heard from Bill, Maurice and Dave. Really great to hear that, really encouraging. We're a tiny company, we've got 18 staff, and most of our carbon footprint is not in what we do in the office. It's actually the wagons that thunder up and down the motorways and dual carriageways, collecting waste lamps, waste fittings, and delivering them to recyclers, and the recycling that takes place. So most of our emissions are in scope 2 and 3. And so our approach is to, again, establish the baseline that we've heard others talk about, but then really try to work with our suppliers of transport and our recyclers to try to help them to improve their emissions, because actually we're not going to be able to achieve it without support from them. So it's very much a partnership-based approach. But we have told them that we tender for our work every 2 years, and that in the tender that happens at the end of this year, 25% of the points will be allocated for those companies that have put changes in place or credible plans in place to show that their carbon emissions are coming down. So hopefully with that incentive, we will be giving those who are doing the right thing more business, and those who perhaps are not doing the right thing or slowing behind the others will get less business. And although we're only a small company, nevertheless, within the lighting recycling, we're the biggest operator in the UK, and so we can perhaps influence and encourage some of our suppliers to do the right thing. It's a partnership. We've also offered seed funding to help them to move down that road as well. And in the long term, it may mean we have to change the way we arrange our collections, because actually it may be that what we do at the moment is not the most efficient way, and so we'll have to bring our collection partners with us as well on that process. So I think it was Maurice, talked about communication being part of the key. We will have to make sure we're communicating and bringing people, collection partners, logistics partners, recycling partners with us. So that's a nutshell introduction to what we're doing, Ray, but yes, well behind and in awe of what's happening at Sky, Signify and Stoane.
When you mentioned points there, you're talking about, are they B Corp points when you talked about points, Nigel?
Sorry, no, I wasn't, not B Corp points. I was
Okay, just want to clarify that. Okay, all right, no worries. Okay, right, first question's coming in. This is for you, Bill. Thanks for sharing such detailed information this morning. How did you start with your internal analysis to reach the state you're in today? How did you initially set your goals? So basically, I think this is a question for everybody, really. Where do you start? So, Bill.
So Sky, I think, was carbon neutral, which is different to net zero, in 2008, and we partnered with WWF and had taken an active interest in the rainforest long before I joined Sky. My engagement had been very much product focused, and what we did. So the two aspects. One is our fleet, and so that was a lot more simple because it's scope 2. We have data trackers on everything, so we quite easily understood what our footprint was and had put in processes. Where it comes to scope 3, it actually is a lot more difficult to go through that. But pretty much most of your scope 3, for us, was our supply chain. And in that, we ranked initially by cost to get an idea, then by industry. So we pay an awful lot in royalties, but the actual CO2 output from royalties is minimal. Whereas when we are looking at plastics providers or heat sinks or things like that, there's quite a lot of energy in producing aluminium heat sinks. So it was that against the industry type. And then we divided up. So we go down to scope 3, we go down to tier 3 in our supply chain. So we might engage with say Texas Instruments. They will then have 2 or 3 different levels of supply for the manufacturing of those chips, which they will have the license for. And they may have a factory in the US, but pretty much most of it will come from Taiwan, China, Malaysia, etc. So we have plotted our scope not only against our initial tier 1, but when you want to understand their footprint, it is their use, their commuting, if you like, what they bring into the site, plus the transportation of the goods. But then there's another part which, and we've gone to each of our suppliers to ask, there is a spend and percentage spend against our purchase from. So a company might have, I don't know, half a billion spend. If Sky's only 1% of that, they do it for it all. And we then times that figure by 1% to get our influence of that aspect. So we looked at that. We then, I set up basically for each area of the supply chain, from the raw material engagement to OEMs to factories that we have people on site with, then to the logistics, the freight and logistics, our warehousing, our refurbishment and recycling partners. I identified across the team champions from each of those areas. They went out with those spreadsheets to each of those companies to then get the data back so that we could see what model we have. And from that, we're engaging with our biggest influencers, if you like, first. So we just did it on a scope 3 model against spend initially, to then work through by industry and then engagement with supplier to understand where we stood.
Okay, same question to you, Dave. Dave, where did you start? And another person's asking, you know, when you started with the measuring phase, what tools did you use initially?
There's basically a template we're presented with, tab for your scope 1, 2, and 3, and then a set of boxes to fill in effectively. It was tricky and it was daunting, but once you start to think about it, there's some rounding has to happen. Take for example, the staff getting to work, commuting in, they all come in different ways. We're lucky that a good few cycle and walk, that helps, but some take the bus. But keeping track of all of that, we did a quick questionnaire. Most of them filled it in, and those that didn't, we just quickly did it for them. We know where they live, we know how they come in. We don't track every single day which route they took, but you can get pretty quickly establish that and get a figure from that. And there's multipliers, whether it was so many miles on a bus versus so many miles in a car, what kind of car it was. It's categorized into motorbike or small diesel, large petrol, etc., etc. And all of this goes together to spit out a figure. So it's admin, not the hardest in the world. More sort of confusing is things like data. How big is your server? How much did firstly understanding, well, if it's one that you host physically in the building, then it's covered by your electrical supply use, and that's counted elsewhere, and that's literally going to read the meter. Not quite that simple, but you know your electricity usage, your water usage, gas or whatever, and so your computing footprint is in there. But then there's also things, your website, do you have an online HR like we do, the facility, those sorts of things. But again, they're how on earth to do that? But actually, you can quantify how much bandwidth is used, how many gigabytes a month or a day or whatever, and then there's multipliers that the company we used, Earthly, would have in place that would spit out the tonnage for that. So slowly, bit by bit, all these pieces of the puzzle start to click together, and eventually a little number comes up in the bottom right-hand corner, and that's your total. It is a bit bewildering to start with, but there are great companies out there for smaller outfits like us that wouldn't be doing all of this ourselves. But these companies, they do take a fee for it, but they'll walk you through it if you've got questions, and they seem to have encountered all kinds of different businesses, so they're used to working around the oddities that we're bound to have. I think there's probably other little examples I can think of given a moment, but bit by bit we worked our way through them.
So you'd recommend Earthly as for your initial carbon counting, measuring?
Yeah, we didn't look at many. We had heard a few horror stories about just people just blindly buying some carbon from random people online to sort of offset an arbitrary figure, which just seems like a waste of everybody's time. We wanted to do it properly, both in terms of the counts, make sure it's verified by somebody reputable, and that the funds that they offset with, the projects, are legitimate as well. So yeah, I would recommend them. Being perfectly honest, it was we're a bit obsessed with B Corps at the moment because it's a good way of cutting to the chase, and sort of came to know them through that. And but yeah, I'm sure there's dozens of other reputable ones we might have used.
So B Corp do carbon counting as well for your very initial stage, is that correct?
No, they happen to be a carbon counting outfit that is a B Corp in itself.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, same question to you, Maurice. Where would you recommend that, say, a lighting manufacturer, not of your scale, where do they begin? Presumably it is measuring your carbon and getting to grips. Where is your carbon footprint?
Yeah, that is definitely correct. So indeed, you first have to measure it. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And look where your biggest impact is, and focus your efforts there. For us, that was logistics and manufacturing, and making sure that you have the right data. And we used an EHS data platform to manage our data. So we do that all in-house. But we also have reasonable assurance on our non-financial indicators. So that means that for us, EY is really checking and going down to invoice level. So be prepared that if you want to have data which is signed off, that you have to go the extra mile of going into invoices. For us, that is 4,500 invoices per year that are verified. And yeah, you do need a good data system. So I think carbon neutrality is really data driven. It is collaboration. You need collaboration within your entire company. And that is also what Dave said. You have to make sure that your employees are aware of what can I do to make an impact, and also that the choices that they make have an impact on the company's carbon footprint.
So you mentioned EY there. Did they do some work with you on measuring and assessing your carbon?
No, they are our assurance provider. So they do the auditing at the end of the year.
Okay.
So they do it with the same rigor as our financial results. And so we don't take advisory service from them. That's not the point. So they really are our auditor. So make sure that you have your employees engaged, and at the end of the line, just do it. And Nike was right. I think just do it.
Okay. And Nigel, are you using any of these metrics or indices or these organizations to measure your carbon, or how did you begin?
Yeah, we found a small consultancy who would help us, and they're really providing us help in two stages. The first is doing the measuring, and we're providing them with lots of data, particularly because logistics is such a big thing for us. We're providing them with all the postcodes of the collections we did in 2019. We've explained the type of vehicles that get used, the sort of the weight and volume of the waste that we move around. Once we've got the baseline, then stage two, working with them, is to help us come up with the strategies to reduce our carbon footprint. And so, you know, as I mentioned earlier on, it may well be that we have to change the way that we schedule our collections, the type of speed with which we collect our waste, how many containers we give to collectors. It may be that it's better to give the same collector 2 or 3 containers and go there only 1/3 of the number of times, rather than having a wagon going there every time a container is full. So there's certainly quite a lot of opportunity, I think, for us to get our carbon footprint down. But the first is about benchmarking, and benchmarking 2019, not 2020, because 2020 was a totally atypical year.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. But you use an environmental consultancy, an independent consultancy, to begin to get you going on the journey, sort of thing. And were you happy to share who they were, or are they a large company? Or I don't know.
Yes, it was a company called Dudden, and you know, very small. I think they're 3 or 4 people, and for us it was about choosing an organisation that was not huge, because we're not huge, and so we're a little more important to them than being one of hundreds or thousands that they're dealing with. And also they had a background in waste management as well, and so they understood the industry that we were coming from.
Good. And Anthony Farrell is specifically asking about, you know, how did COVID impact on you all on the journey, including the impact on the original base year used. And Maurice, if I come to you first on that, I mean, presumably business travel was particularly hit.
Yeah, good point. So we saw, so 2019 was for us towards the end of the program. It ended end of 2020. So 2019 was for us still a good year, and then 2020 we saw a big drop in everything. But I mean, we projected our carbon footprint to be a little bit higher, but now due to COVID, that turned out to be a little bit lower. So we had to offset less, which is good. But we do project that it will go back to pre-COVID levels in the coming years. For the new program, we already selected 2019 as the baseline year, because we launched the program in September 2020. So we did not have the full year 2020 yet. And now we do have the results in, and we do see indeed that the numbers are impacted versus 2019. But we do expect them to be back to pre-COVID levels before the end of our program. So we will continue anyway with our 2019 baseline. But yeah, we definitely see the impact, Ray.
And Bill, same question to you. I presume a lot of companies out there are saying, you know, survival is important, and getting our numbers right and getting back in the black is important, and we're going to delay, you know, getting around to net zero. What would you say to them?
Yes, we were affected. I think I saw a 2-month dip and up again. There was a period where engineers couldn't deliver to people's homes. They were doing it, communicating outside, and then getting all the PPE so that we could then get back on. We had some of our Chinese factories down for a period of time while they were COVID checking everyone before they were allowed back in the factories. So we definitely saw a dip. Our big impact really has been not being able to visit the factories and engage in getting them on board so much. So yes, our travel has definitely gone down, but it is hard by WebEx or Teams or Zoom to engage with the factory on how they can reduce their energy, what partnership we can do with them, etc., etc. So that has been probably a delay to the program, although we've got significantly reduced CO2 figures for 2020. It's not necessarily moved our program forward. So we feel that in the toolkits that we've got for our suppliers, we've not been able to talk them through, give it to them. We had to delay our energy management audits of our suppliers because we couldn't get people into the factories. So that was a big delay for us.
Presumably, I presume we're in agreement that the simplest thing you could do is changing your energy supplier. Dave, would that be the first thing that on your agenda?
Yeah, we've been looking at that for a while, and we I don't know, sleptwalked into a contract, both with electricity and gas, that's perhaps sub-optimum on this front. But you know, we're not a huge business, and there's penalties of coming out of it prematurely. We know what we want to do. We've got firms lined up, but it's a question of, you could offset an awful lot, or you could do an awful lot of good with the penalty of coming out too early. So we're just, I think it's by the end of this year, every one of them will have moved across, and we then need to start looking at the actual. They just moved across to greener suppliers, or completely green suppliers. We do use gas for heating up here in Edinburgh in a big tin shed, you know, space heaters. So you know, that's going to be a slower one to tackle, but bit by bit we can attack that too. But yeah, it is a big one. For us though, the one back to your previous question was, what really stood out was air freight. And in a year, well, the question about 2020, because you generally count the previous full year. So actually I would say, if you can afford it, if you haven't been too badly dented by COVID, it's not a bad year to get started, because the cost of your carbon offset is likely to be less than it would have been, you know, the previous year or next year if things have been down, whether you've got the means. We thankfully were able to. So it was a quiet year on carbon front, should we say. So we sort of compensated that for a bit by including in our scope 3 stuff that we arguably wouldn't need to normally, you know, air freights for our customers collecting, which has nothing really to do with us, but actually feels a little bit disingenuous, and until we can engage with them properly for them to take that on, we just lumped it in, and that you could see it's quite a big spike on our scope 3. So I don't know, it's pros and cons of doing it in a COVID year, I guess. But yeah, energy, aside from that air freight energy you know, usage in the factory or the paint shop is significant.
So if switching your energy supplier is the most straightforward and obvious thing to do, Dave, what have you found is the most challenging? What do you expect to be the most challenging aspect of going net zero?
Beyond, not the energy side of it, you mean?
Yeah, yes. I mean, what do you expect, you know, to be quite, you know, the toughest nut to crack really in your process and in your manufacturing?
Interesting question. I mentioned leaks. I like to look at the whole thing and think, well, where's the most financial or carbon hungry leak, or you know, in terms of embarrassment, which things would we like least to be confronted with? We talk quite a bit as our business about, you know, keeping it local, and that helps a lot with the carbon as well, and flexibility and cost of operations too. But there's this sort of conflict of selling stuff overseas, so that's a challenge. Modern technology, you know, collaboration with other outfits elsewhere is a possible area to explore. For a small business like us, it's not been something we've done up till now, but yeah, you can't teleport things as yet. So how do we overcome that? You sort of can with modern CAD drawings, modern communications, that sort of thing. Similar equipment, you know, in 2 locations, you could almost remotely control it, I suppose. That's interesting. Other than that, plugging waste, bringing less out of the ground and using up every last scrap of it to be as optimum as possible. And yeah, really trying to follow through with supporting the kit that does exist. You know, it's been made, make sure it only gets broken apart as a last resort. That's partly about communication of information, you know, eco passports or whatever, good instructions, hosting stuff online so that people can get at that information, and you know, providing the service that people know about and can get to if it's needed to extend the product. Again, it's a bit of a challenge for a small little business without a network in place yet. We're doing our little bit in the UK anyway, but I wonder how quickly, or if, a network of service providers will come and occupy that space.
Okay, all right, thanks, Dave. We should really talk about the role of offsetting here, because is offsetting like when you get to the difficult bit, you basically pay somebody to plant some trees. Maurice, is that an unfair characteristic of the role of offsetting?
I'm not sure whether I call it fair. It's at least interesting, Ray. And of course, we do get this question quite regularly. And I think if you show as a company that you are not able to reduce your carbon footprint, and then you simply offset and you don't do anything, then indeed that could be a simple trick to claim to be carbon neutral. I think you have to fight on all fronts, and you really have to make sure that you reduce your carbon footprint as a company. Yeah? And we have been working on that for a decade now. But there will always be for us unavoidable emissions. Take, for example, business travel. Once any of our employees set foot in a plane and the plane is airborne, you have a carbon footprint. So, and we are in the lighting industry. We are not in the industry of phasing out fossil fuels for planes. So as long as there's no alternatives for these kind of emissions, we will always have an emission. And then I think a carbon offsetting scheme is a great way of compensating for these unavoidable emissions. But again, condition is that you have to reduce as much as possible your own everything you can control.
Bill, what's your thoughts on offsetting and all the you can fly business class as long as you offset it? Is that how it works?
Personally, I'm actually very anti-offsetting. There are some technologies which I would like to encourage. There has been some good work on carbon absorbing from mechanical processes. There's been some work in Iceland through sponsorship from Switzerland, where they're using fans. They're sucking carbon out of the air and they're storing it in the volcanic substrate, where it reforms carbon into the rock. I think those are sort of the longer term sustainable options. We can't have 3 planets worth of trees to solve this. It's not going to work. I think the other ones are where our industry moves to, and a little bit more tricky, but our industry moves to producing or using carbon absorbing materials in its production and storage. So again, there is some of the big work that's going on with alternative energy sources from plantations. So the trees absorb the carbon, that carbon is captured in the conversion to energy. So you have absorption and locking in through creating energy. So where there are those sort of technologies, that's really personally what I would want to support. Now, some of those are costing $200 a ton of CO2 capture, where I'm sure you can go online and find one for a couple of dollars a ton of carbon capture. I'm very cynical of those. I'm very also cynical of the ones where you are purchasing the emissions from a tree somewhere. You're not even owning the infrastructure, but it's a road, isn't it? It is a journey, and if you can afford it, it's important to go for the most long-term sustainable option that you can. And maybe it is up to big companies to be setting that standard, and hopefully that will move the reduction in the cost of those technologies down, so more can to jump into that boat.
Okay, good stuff. We're coming up to past, so I think we need to wrap up. There's lots of things we didn't get around to talking about, and we need to talk to at some stage. When we get to end of life luminaires later on in the autumn, we can talk about materials and recycle it and bioplastics and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's a great start today, inspirational, and how to take those first few baby steps on your journey to net zero. So thank you, Maurice, Dave, and Bill, for sharing your journeys on your various where you are on those journeys and with your scale and everything, and Nigel as well. And we will see you again on Thursday, the 16th of September. For the specifiers role in the circular economy, 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 16th of September. We'll see you then. Finally, just thank to all our speakers, and thank you for your questions and comments today. Thank you.
And thank you to Ray for hosting the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel.